Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight, we're in wintertime London, where respectability can be more ruthless than any criminal, and a man can be ruined long before a court ever hears his name. A confidential memorandum vanishes from a locked dispatch case, and the world decides it already knows the culprit. But when everyone agrees too quickly, it's rarely because the case is simple. It's because the truth is inconvenient. As always, this is an original Nocturnal Tales story, written in the spirit and style of the great Golden Age mysteries, but entirely our own creation. And if you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. The links are in the description. Now then, listen closely. Keep your conclusions in check, and do not trust the obvious too soon. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Gentleman Who Was Already Condemned. I have noticed in the course of my association with Hercule Poirot that the public is never so eager for justice as when it has already decided upon the criminal. Once society has fixed its eye upon a victim, evidence becomes a mere formality, and fairness a tiresome obstacle. One may acquit a man in court, perhaps, but in the clubs, in the drawing rooms, and over the breakfast table, he remains condemned forever. It was upon a bleak afternoon in January that this reflection first took shape in my mind. Poirot and I were seated in our sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions. Outside, London wore that smoky, dun-coloured aspect peculiar to winter, when even the lamplight seems weary. Poirot, immaculate as ever, had arranged before him a small tray containing 3 eggs of different sizes, which he was studying with a gravity ordinarily reserved for state documents or murder weapons. "It is monstrous," he declared. "One calls them large, another fresh, another selected, and yet they refuse to correspond one with another in any rational degree. Civilization rests upon order, Hastings. When the eggs become anarchists, all is in danger." I just opened my mouth to remark that the British Empire was likely to survive a little irregularity in breakfast produce when the bell rang. Our visitor was shown in by George with that expression of discreet disapproval which he reserved for people who arrived in evident distress and without proper regard for the household rhythm. The man who entered was of middle height, perhaps 45, spare, carefully dressed, and wore his dark hair brushed rather too smoothly across a high forehead. His face was pale in the manner of a man who has slept badly for weeks, yet there was something soldierly in his carriage still, a remnant of discipline not wholly broken by anxiety. He bowed first to Poirot, then to me. "Monsieur Poirot, I am Paul Lévy." Poirot rose at once and inclined his head with grave courtesy. "Be seated, monsieur. You are troubled." The man gave a short, bitter smile as he sat down. "That, I think, is already known to half of London." I confess the name stirred some vague recollection in me. Then I had it. Lévy. Yes, of course, the War Office business. There had been paragraphs in the papers some weeks earlier, written in that poisonous tone by which newspapers imply guilt, while pretending merely to report suspicion. A confidential memorandum had disappeared from a locked dispatch case, and, after some days of rumour, the blame had fallen upon one Captain Paul Lévy, attached until recently to a section of the Intelligence Department. He had not, so far as I knew, been charged. But his resignation had followed very promptly. Poirot had, I think, already remembered the same matter. "The stolen memorandum," he said softly. Lévy looked up sharply. "Yes." There was a moment's silence. Poirot did not hurry him. That was one of the little arts in which he excelled. He could be very quick himself, but he understood that another man's truth often emerged only when allowed to do so in its own time. At last Lévy said, "I did not take it." Poirot spread his hands. "Then it remains to discover who did." The other laughed, a low, mirthless laugh. "You say it as though the thing were still open. It is not open, Monsieur Poirot. It is closed, finished, settled in every mind that matters. You have not been arrested." No. There was insufficient evidence for that. One might say, and again that bitter smile touched his mouth, that the authorities were just enough not to prosecute me, while society was unjust enough to punish me all the same. I was beginning to warm to the fellow. There was pain in him, certainly, but no self-pity of the common sort. Poirot seated himself again and folded his fingertips together. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Levy drew a breath. The document was a summary memorandum. Nothing theatrical, no secret map with red arrows, no melodrama of invisible ink. Merely a concise paper prepared from several reports concerning certain military supply arrangements and continental discussions, important enough that it ought not to have gone astray. Not important enough, perhaps, to shake Europe, but more than enough to ruin one man. "And you were the last known person in possession of it?" I asked. He turned to me. "Yes. I carried the dispatch case from Colonel Harbury's office to my own room. I unlocked it there, checked several papers, and later, less than an hour later, the memorandum was missing." "Who knew it was there?" asked Poirot. "My superior, Colonel Harbury. 2 clerks, perhaps, who handled the earlier files. A Major Cresswell, who had spoken of the matter in general terms. Possibly 1 or 2 others. In offices such as those, knowledge leaks through cracks no one admits exist." "And the dispatch case had been forced?" "No." "Then either you removed the paper yourself, or someone had access to the key." Levy nodded. "Exactly." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The key?" "I kept it on my watch chain." "And no duplicate?" "So far as I know, none officially." Poirot murmured, "Ah," in that thoughtful way which revealed nothing and meant a great deal. Levy went on. "I reported the loss at once. There was an inquiry. Quiet at first, then less quiet. Questions were asked. My movements examined. My accounts looked into. Letters, old letters, dragged from obscurity. Friendships reinterpreted. My ancestry discussed in rooms where I was not present." He said that last sentence very evenly, but the hand resting on the arm of the chair had tightened. Poirot's voice became gentler still. "You are of an old French-Jewish family?" "Yes, my grandfather came to England after 70. My father was more English than most Englishmen. I was educated here, I served here. I should have thought it enough." He paused. It was not enough. No one spoke for a moment. Then Poirot said quietly, "No, for some people it never is." I glanced at him. There was no sentimentality in his tone, only comprehension. Poirot, being himself a foreigner in England, had his own notions about the speed with which civilized men become savages when given a respectable excuse. Levy continued, "At first they only suspected me. Then they began to prefer the suspicion. It was neat, convenient. I was intelligent enough to be dangerous, foreign enough to be doubted, and isolated enough to be sacrificed." "Isolated?" I said. "My wife died 3 years ago. I have no influential family connection, no political patron, no one with a voice loud enough to defend me." "And Colonel Harbury?" asked Poirot. Levy hesitated. "He behaved correctly." "Which is not always the same as loyally," said Poirot. A faint colour came into the man's face. "No." Poirot leaned back. "Why come to me now, monsieur? Why not 3 weeks ago?" For the first time Levy seemed embarrassed. "Because until yesterday I still believed that reason might prevail, that someone in authority would look again at the facts and perceive the absurdity. Yesterday I was informed, unofficially of course, that it would be best if I left London for a time. There are gentlemen's clubs where my name may no longer be mentioned. My tailor has become cold. An engagement for my niece has been broken. One begins to understand the machinery of disgrace. I saw then, more clearly than before, the true cruelty of the affair. No prison cell, no public trial, no dramatic ruin, but the slow, relentless closing of doors. Poirot asked, "And yesterday something else happened?" Lévy stared. "How did you know?" Poirot smiled. "Because you are not a man who comes merely because society is vulgar. Something gave you hope, or fear." Our visitor reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced an envelope. "This was delivered to my rooms last night. No signature, no address beyond my name." He handed it to Poirot, who removed from it a single sheet. On that sheet were penciled a few words only. "Ask for the truth about General Vallon's dinner. The wrong man is paid." There is another memorandum. Poirot read it twice and passed it to me. "Well," I said, "that is plain enough at any rate. Who is General Vallon?" "A French officer," said Lévy. "Attached recently to a mission in London. He dined last month with Colonel Harbury and 2 men from the Foreign Office. I was present only at the beginning." "And why were you present only at the beginning?" asked Poirot quickly. "Because Harbury sent me away to fetch a portfolio from another room. When I returned, I was told I was no longer needed." Poirot's eyes flashed. "Tiens." He rose and went to the fireplace, standing with his back to us, his hands clasped behind him. I knew that attitude well. It signified that the little grey cells had begun their proper work. At length he turned. "Monsieur Lévy, I do not promise miracles, but I will say this. When a case is too convenient, I distrust it. When everyone agrees too quickly, I distrust it still more. And when anonymous letters speak of the wrong man, I become interested." For the first time, something like life returned to Lévy's face. "You will take the case?" Poirot bowed. "Yes, I will take it." And as I looked from the pale, strained figure of Paul Lévy to the neat, alert little man beside the fire, I had the queer conviction that we were standing not at the beginning of a mere theft inquiry, but at the edge of one of those dangerous affairs in which pride, patriotism, and prejudice make a more explosive compound than gunpowder. It was a conviction, as events proved, entirely justified. Chapter 2. The Dinner of General Vallon. It is one of the defects of my character, though I prefer to think of it as a healthy English instinct, that I have never entirely approved of anonymous communications. A signed accusation may be false, malicious, theatrical, or idiotic, but at least it possesses the poor merit of courage. An unsigned one has all the same possibilities and none of the excuse. I said as much to Poirot after Monsieur Paul Lévy had left us. Poirot, who had placed the penciled note upon the mantelpiece with mathematical exactness, shrugged his shoulders. "But yes, Hastings, the anonymous letter is detestable. That is why it is so often useful. The writer is a coward, perhaps, but not necessarily a liar. It may be a hoax. It may, but observe, its stupidity is limited. It does not say Lévy is innocent and X is guilty. That would be melodrama. Instead, it points to a dinner, suggests another memorandum, and says only that the wrong man has paid. That has at least the perfume of truth." I lit a cigarette and considered the matter. "You think there really is another memorandum?" Poirot sat down and steepled his fingers. "I think someone wishes us to believe there is another memorandum. That is not the same thing. Still, the phrase is interesting. If there is indeed a second paper, then either the first was stolen for its own sake, and the second confirms its contents, or else the first was merely bait, and the second is the true object." I stared at him. "My dear Poirot, the thing grows more involved every minute." "Certainly, that is why it becomes less boring. He spoke so placidly that I laughed in spite of myself. The next morning at 10:30, we set out for the War Office. I need hardly say that our reception there was not encouraging. Official England has never loved the private detective, and it loves him least of all when he arrives uninvited to inspect the machinery of official error. A junior personage with a polished forehead and a voice of bureaucratic frost informed us that Colonel Harbury was occupied. Poirot replied with equal politeness that he would wait. There is no force in nature more patient than a determined Belgian in a well-brushed overcoat. We had not been seated in the anteroom 5 minutes before a door opened sharply, and a man of military bearing came out. Colonel Harbury was tall, hard-featured, and of that dry, compact type which always makes me think of old leather and regimental silver. His moustache was clipped with ferocious neatness, and his pale eyes had the expression of one who has spent the better part of his life enduring fools without pleasure. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I am told you wish to see me." Poirot rose. "If you are so good, Colonel." Harbury looked at him, then at me, then back at Poirot. "I can spare you 10 minutes. Poirot inclined his head. "It will be enough. To begin." We were shown into an office whose atmosphere struck me as somehow aggressively honorable. There were dispatch boxes, maps, framed photographs of military groups, and 1 or 2 old campaign prints. Everything suggested discipline, service, and the clean conscience of empire. Yet I have learned that innocence does not furnish a room more attractively than guilt. Harbury remained standing for a moment before his desk. "I understand," he said, "that you have been approached by Levy." "Yes." The Colonel's face altered hardly at all, but I thought I caught the faintest tightening about the mouth. "Then I will save time. He is an able fellow. I was sorry for what occurred. But the circumstances were, and remain, deeply suspicious." Poirot nodded. "Suspicious, yes. Conclusive, no. That depends on what standard one requires." Poirot smiled faintly. "In the matter of destroying a man, I prefer a high one." Harbury's eyes sharpened. I saw at once that Poirot had scored a point. Men of Harbury's kind do not care to be thought unjust, even when they are. He gestured briefly toward chairs and sat down himself. "What is it you want?" Poirot took the anonymous note from his pocket and laid it on the desk. "I wish to ask first about the dinner of General Vallon." Harbury glanced at the note. For the first time a definite change came over him. It was very slight, no more than a stillness, but it was there. "This," he said, "is absurd." "Possibly. Yet it interests me that you do not ask where I obtained it." "That is not my business." "Everything seems to be your business, Colonel, except perhaps what happened at that dinner." The man's eyes grew cold. General Vallon dined here in an informal capacity. 2 Foreign Office men were present. Levy attended briefly, as did Major Cresswell. Nothing occurred, which bears on the disappearance of the memorandum. Poirot said mildly, "Then it will be easy to describe the evening." Harbury's fingers tapped once upon the desk, then were still. "General Vallon is a senior French officer. Certain matters of procurement and intelligence liaison were under discussion. We dined at 8. Levy brought in some papers at the beginning. I later sent him away. Cresswell remained through most of the discussion. At 10:30 the party ended. That is all." "Why was Levy sent away?" "Because he was no longer required." "Why was Major Cresswell not sent away?" "Because he was required." Poirot let that pass. "Had the missing memorandum been mentioned that evening?" "No." "Not even indirectly?" "No." "Did General Vallon know of its existence?" Harbury's reply came a shade too quickly. "I cannot say." Poirot's eyes rested on him. Indeed. And yet it concerned French as well as British military arrangements. Harbury leaned back. Monsieur Poirot, I begin to think this interview is a mistake. Poirot spread his hands. As you please. Then perhaps we speak of another matter. Has there been within the last month a second document misplaced, removed, copied, or discussed in such a way as to cause anxiety? Harbury's expression became one of perfect military blankness. No. Poirot rose at once. Merci, Colonel. You have been of assistance. The other looked almost startled. Is that all? For the moment, yes. Outside in the corridor I burst out. Well, he told us nothing. Poirot looked pleased with himself. On the contrary, he told us several things. Such as? That the dinner matters very much. That General Vallon knew more than Harbury wishes admitted. That there is almost certainly another paper. And that Colonel Harbury is a man divided between loyalty to an institution and loyalty to a person. I blinked. I saw none of that. No, you saw only the moustache. He led the way down the stone stairs and out into Whitehall. As we turned toward St. James's Park, Poirot slowed. We must speak with Major Cresswell. Who is he? A question I was about to ask you, Hastings. You have the military acquaintances. I have only the psychology. By noon, thanks to a club acquaintance of mine, we had obtained a sketch of the man. Major Adrian Cresswell was, it seemed, well connected, charming in a brisk fashion, and one of those officers who prosper by seeming both intelligent and pleasantly untroubled by conscience. He was about 38, had seen service, was popular in certain clubs, and had recently attached himself to a circle of political hostesses who mixed soldiers, diplomats, journalists, and persons with no visible occupation but plenty of information. That, said Poirot, is not encouraging. We found him in Pall Mall, coming out of his club. He was a good-looking fellow in a clean-cut way, fair-haired, with an easy carriage, and the sort of smile which appears to include everyone while committing itself to no one. He greeted me with ready civility when I named myself, and after a brief glance at Poirot, consented to take tea with us at a nearby hotel lounge. I suppose, he said, stirring his cup, that this is about poor old Lévy. Poirot watched him. Poor old Lévy? Yes, beastly business. Beastly. His tone was sympathetic, but a shade too polished. One felt he had practiced it. You were with Colonel Harbury and General Vallon on the night in question? Asked Poirot. Yes. And Monsieur Lévy? For a little while only. Did anything unusual occur? Nothing whatever. Poirot nodded. And yet someone writes anonymously to say that the truth lies in the matter of General Vallon's dinner. Cresswell's spoon stopped for the smallest fraction of a second. Anonymous letters usually mean a servant, a woman, or a lunatic, he said lightly. Or a frightened man, said Poirot. Cresswell smiled. Quite. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, Major, who else was expected that evening? For the first time the smile left the man's face. No one. But someone failed to come. Cresswell set down his cup. I really do not know what you mean. Poirot's voice remained pleasant. Colonel Harbury remembers the dinner as fixed, self-contained, complete. You remember it as slightly disordered. There was one extra place laid, then removed. A servant hesitated when pouring the wine, and when General Vallon made his little remark about our friend from the embassy, you looked at the door. I was so astonished that I very nearly betrayed it. Cresswell, however, did not move. Then he laughed. You are a remarkable fellow, Monsieur Poirot. If I say yes, I invite a dozen further questions. If I say no, you will think me a liar. I think that already, said Poirot cheerfully. There was a pause. Then Cresswell said in a changed voice, There was to have been another man there. He did not come. His name? I cannot tell you that. Because you are forbidden? Because I am not a fool. Poirot sat back. Ah, then he was not merely a guest. He was the point of the evening. Cresswell met his gaze. I shall say nothing more. No, said Poirot, you have already said enough. When we were outside again, I demanded an explanation, but Poirot merely shook his head. There is still a piece missing. We know of the dinner. We know there was an absent guest. We know Harbury conceals it and Cresswell fears it. But the true question, Hastings, is this. Why must Levy bear the blame? And the answer? Poirot looked across the wet street, where a newspaper placard announced some foreign crisis in letters of alarm. Because the real scandal is not that a memorandum vanished. It is that it may have vanished to protect someone whose name cannot safely appear. He paused, then added in a tone of satisfaction, and when powerful men protect a secret, they nearly always do it clumsily. That afternoon, upon our return to Whitehaven Mansions, George informed us that a lady had called during our absence and had left no name. She said, sir, that she would return at 6 o'clock precisely, and that the matter concerned Captain Levy. Poirot glanced at the clock. It wanted 10 minutes to 6. He smiled very slightly. Then, Hastings, we are about to receive either the truth or something dressed to resemble it. Chapter 3. The Lady Who Preferred Disgrace to Silence. At 6 o'clock precisely, George ushered in our visitor. She was a woman of perhaps 32 or 33, dark-haired, slender, and dressed with that quiet perfection which suggests neither extravagance nor economy, but simply long habit in choosing the right thing. Her face was pale without being fragile, the features were regular, and the eyes, grey, steady, and very intelligent, had in them an expression of self-command which is often mistaken by foolish people for coldness. There are women, I think, whom one notices first for their beauty, and others for their presence. This lady belonged to the second kind. She entered the room without haste, without uncertainty, and without any of the little flutterings by which nervous callers usually betray themselves to a detective. Yet I saw at once that she was under strain. Her gloves were too tightly clasped in one hand. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "my name is Claire Desforges." Poirot bowed. "Pray be seated, madame." She sat, declined tea, and glanced once toward me. "You may speak before Captain Hastings," said Poirot. "He is discreet when it is necessary, and indiscreet only by temperament." That won from her the faintest shadow of a smile. "I have come," she said, "because Paul Levy is an innocent man." Poirot inclined his head as though she had merely confirmed an appointment. "Yes." She looked at him sharply. "You say that very easily." "No. I say it provisionally. The innocence, like the guilt, must still be proved." She accepted that. "I knew him years ago," she said. "Not intimately. Our families were acquainted in Paris before the war. We met again in London last autumn. He asked permission to call from time to time. I gave it. That is all." Her tone was even, but something in it suggested to me that "that is all" covered a territory which had not always seemed small to one of the parties concerned. "You are French?" asked Poirot. "My father was French. My husband was English." "Was? He died 4 years ago." "Ah." Poirot's "ah" contained sympathy without intrusion. He had a gift for that. The lady continued, "I had not meant to involve myself. In affairs such as this, a woman who comes forward is at once suspected of romance, intrigue, or hysteria, sometimes of all three. But the matter has gone too far." "You know something of the stolen memorandum?" "No, nothing direct." She paused. "But I know something of the dinner at Colonel Harbury's house." Poirot's eyes brightened. "Excellent. She turned those cool grey eyes upon him. "No, Monsieur Poirot. Not excellent. Ugly." There was silence for a moment. Then Poirot said quietly, "Proceed." She drew a breath. There was indeed to have been another guest. His name? Mr. Stephen March. This meant nothing to me. Poirot, however, gave no sign one way or the other. "He is attached unofficially to the Foreign Office," Madame Deforge went on. "One of those men who are never announced in the papers but always seem to know what should not yet be public. He is intimate with several diplomatic circles. He is also—" She hesitated. "A man who should not have been present at that dinner if the dinner were what it pretended to be." "Why not?" "Because he is not the sort of man one includes for military convenience. One includes him for political convenience." Poirot nodded gently. "And he did not come." "He came late." I leaned forward. "Major Cresswell told us he did not come at all." She looked at me. "Then Major Cresswell lied." Poirot's face became very still. "You are certain?" "Yes. How do you know?" "Because I saw March enter." "When?" "At a little after 9. "And where were you, madame?" She met that question squarely. "In the drawing-room next door." I confess this startled me. She saw it and went on at once. "The explanation is not creditable, but it is simple. Colonel Harbury's sister, Mrs. Fortescue, was giving a small bridge evening in the house. I had been asked. I wished not to go. At the last moment I did go, because I had reason to think Paul Levy might be there. It was all said plainly enough, but a man would have to be blind not to understand what lay beneath it. Poirot, who was never blind in such matters, asked only, "And you saw this Stephen March arrive?" "Yes, he was admitted privately by a side door from the corridor. He was angry." "Angry?" "He spoke low, but not low enough. I heard him say to Colonel Harbury, 'You should never have put it in writing.'" Poirot's eyes flashed. "Ah!" I then heard Harbury answer, "It was not meant for circulation." March replied, "That is precisely what worries me." And after that? Mrs. Fortescue joined me almost immediately. I could hear no more. Later, perhaps 20 minutes later, I saw Major Cresswell go into the corridor very quickly. He looked disturbed. Then, after some time, Mr. March left again. "By the same door?" "Yes." "Was General Vallon still in the dining-room then?" "I cannot swear to it, but I believe so." Poirot was silent for a moment. "This is of the greatest importance," he said. "Yes," said Madame Deforge, "and the greatest danger." "To whom?" "To Paul, if the wrong people know I have spoken." Poirot tilted his head. "Why danger to him, rather than to you?" For the first time a real emotion appeared in her voice. "Because he has already been marked out. Because once a machine such as this begins to move, it must crush someone. If it cannot crush him entirely, it may still crush what remains of his life." Poirot regarded her with an expression at once kind and penetrating. "You are devoted to Monsieur Levy." Her hands tightened on the gloves. "I admire him." Poirot said nothing. She gave a short, almost angry breath. "Yes, very well. I am devoted to him. Does that damage the truth?" "No," said Poirot. "Sometimes it assists it." I could not help but feel sorry for her then. She was not a sentimental woman. One saw that at once. Whatever feeling she had for Levy had been governed, resisted, perhaps hidden even from herself until circumstances made concealment ridiculous. There is a peculiar dignity in such natures. They do not give their hearts cheaply, and when they do, they resent being observed in the act. Poirot resumed gently, "Why did you not come sooner?" "Because I hoped the matter would resolve itself without my intervention." "That was foolish." "Yes. Then why come now?" She was silent a second too long. Poirot said softly, "Someone has warned you off." She looked up. "How do you know these things?" "Because human beings are alike in their vanities and their fears. Who warned you?" She reached into her handbag and produced a card. Upon it, in a man's hand, was written, "For your own sake and for Captain Levy's, do not repeat drawing-room impressions as though they were evidence." No signature. Poirot examined it. "When did you receive this?" "This morning." "Delivered how?" "By messenger." "And you think it from March?" "Yes." "Not Harbury?" "No. Harbury would be more direct. March is the sort of man who threatens elegantly." Poirot smiled faintly. "Very true." He placed the card beside the anonymous note already upon the mantelpiece, aligning the edges with maddening neatness. "Madame, you have rendered Monsieur Levy a real service. But one thing remains obscure. Why should the disappearance of a memorandum be used to protect Stephen March? He is not, I think, important enough by himself." She hesitated. "No, not by himself. Then whom does he protect?" This time her composure broke, not violently, but enough for me to see that the answer mattered. "I am not certain," she said, "but I believe it concerns an arrangement with a French intermediary. Someone unofficial, someone who could not endure publicity. There was talk weeks ago in one of the embassy salons. Certain papers had been shown where they ought not to have been shown. Certain promises made where they ought not to have been made. I did not understand it fully. Only this. If the truth emerged, it would be a political scandal, not merely a military one." Poirot leaned back. "And therefore a scapegoat was required." "Yes." There was a ring at the front bell. George crossed the hall. We heard the murmur of a voice outside, then his step returning. He entered with a card upon a tray. Poirot took it. "Well?" I asked. He handed it to me. It bore the name Major Adrian Cresswell. "Show him in," said Poirot. Madame Desforges rose at once. "No, I do not wish to meet him." Poirot stood. "You shall not." He moved with great quickness for so neat a little man, ushering her through the inner door toward his bedroom passage. "One moment," he said under his breath. "Remain there until I call." She disappeared just as Major Cresswell was shown in. He came in with that same agreeable clubman's air, but I noticed at once that the agreeable air was under strain. He had removed his gloves too fast, and one finger of the right glove was turned awkwardly inside out. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "forgive this intrusion. I fear I may have been over-hasty earlier. There is, perhaps, something I ought to tell you." Poirot resumed his place by the fire. "How fortunate," he murmured. "We were just speaking of candour." Cresswell glanced at me, then back at Poirot. "I would prefer this to be private." "No." The Major's jaw hardened almost imperceptibly. "Very well. There was indeed another guest expected at Harbury's dinner, Stephen March. But March did not, in fact, sit down with us." "That we know." Cresswell's eyes narrowed for the briefest instant. He had not expected that. Poirot continued mildly. "You omitted his name earlier. Why?" "Because I had no desire to embroil the Foreign Office." "How patriotic!" A flush rose in the man's face. "Damn it, sir, this is no drawing-room puzzle. If certain names become entangled in a public inquiry, there may be consequences beyond one unfortunate officer's reputation." Poirot's voice sharpened suddenly. "One unfortunate officer's reputation? You speak as though Captain Levy were a hat left in a cab." Cresswell drew himself up. "I regret the phrase. But the essential point remains. There are interests larger than his." Poirot's expression changed. The softness went out of it entirely. "There are always men who say that," he replied. "It is the eternal excuse of cowards." The words landed. Cresswell went white. For a moment I thought he would lose control of himself. Instead, he mastered the impulse with visible effort. "I did not come here to be insulted." "No," said Poirot. "You came because you are frightened." That hit home. Cresswell gave a harsh little laugh. "If I were frightened, Monsieur Poirot, it would not be of you." "Of March, then." The Major's silence was answer enough. Poirot stepped closer. "What has he done?" Before Cresswell could answer, George appeared again at the door, plainly disturbed. "A message, sir, delivered by hand." Poirot took the folded paper and opened it. I saw his eyes alter. "What is it?" I said. He handed it to me. There were only 3 lines. "If you value Captain Levy's life, keep him away from Charing Cross Station tonight at 9:15. If he goes, he dies." No signature. I looked up sharply. Cresswell had gone quite still. Poirot turned to him. "You know what this means." And Major Cresswell, after one brief struggle with himself, answered in a low voice, "Yes, March is running." And now, before we resume, a brief word from the Bureau. Many of you ask where our stories may be found beyond YouTube. The answer is quite simple. Only one story makes its way to YouTube each week. Beyond that, we publish 3 new stories every week on Patreon, where supporters help us keep the lamps lit, the papers in order, and the next mystery upon the writing desk. For those who are not in a position to support us there, 2 of those weekly stories are also released on Spotify. And Spotify is free. There is no need for a paid membership. Much like YouTube, listening there without paying still supports the creator through advertisements. For those who prefer to support the show more directly, we also have Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal, and you will find those links in the description below. The plain truth is that our YouTube channel is not monetized. That means these stories continue only because listeners choose to support them through Patreon, Spotify, Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal. Without that support, productions of this kind become very difficult to continue. For those who wish to step inside the archive, Patreon offers The Listening Room, $2.99 a month, ad-free episodes and early access. The Writing Table, $12 a month. Voting on themes, behind-the-scenes notes, character sheets, inspirations, alternate endings, and your name in our monthly credits. The Archive Society, $30 a month. Quarterly ebook anthologies in PDF and EPUB, with your name printed among the patrons of the Archive Society. Our thanks, as ever, to those who make these stories possible. And now, back to the case. Chapter 4. The Train at 9:15. For perhaps 3 seconds after Major Cresswell spoke, nobody moved. Then Poirot came to life with a swiftness which always astonished me. He crossed to the bell, rang it sharply, and when George appeared, said at once, "Send a telegram to Captain Paul Levy immediately. He is not to leave his rooms this evening on any account. If he has already gone out, a man must be sent to Charing Cross Station without delay. Take a taxi. Spend what is necessary." George, who had the finest servant's gift in England, the ability to accept the extraordinary as though it were merely an inconvenience in the silver cupboard, bowed and vanished. Poirot turned back. "Hastings, your hat. We go out in 2 minutes." Then, without the least change of tone, he addressed Cresswell. "You will remain." The Major gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Remain, my dear sir?" "Yes. Because if you attempt to leave now, I shall hand you at once to the police as a man withholding material evidence in a matter of espionage and attempted murder. Whether that would succeed in court, I do not know, but it would certainly be disagreeable." Cresswell stared at him. He looked, for the first time since I had met him, what he truly was beneath the easy manners. A man cornered between competing loyalties and not liking the shape of either. "You take a great deal upon yourself, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's eyes were hard as green glass, less than those who ruined Lévy. He turned and called toward the inner room. "Madame, you may return." Claire Deforge came back into the room. Cresswell started visibly on seeing her, and a curious look passed over his face, something between anger and resignation. "So," he said, "you?" "Yes," she answered. It was not a dramatic exchange, but one felt the history behind it. Poirot wasted no time. "Now, Major, enough of half-truths. Who is Stephen March running to meet at Charing Cross?" Cresswell hesitated only a moment. "A courier." "English?" "No." "French?" He nodded. Claire Deforge said sharply, "Then it is true." Cresswell looked at her with sudden irritation. "Oh, spare me the salon wisdom, Claire. You people heard 3 scraps of diplomatic gossip and thought yourselves in possession of the age." "It appears," she said coldly, "that the scraps were sufficient." Poirot cut across them. "What was March doing?" Cresswell passed a hand across his forehead. There was a private channel, unofficial, deniable, the sort of thing governments use while pretending not to. March had been employed to feel his way with certain continental intermediaries over supply guarantees. Harbury knew of it only in part. Vallon knew more. March, I think, knew too much. And the memorandum? It contained references, brief ones, but enough. Not the whole arrangement, but enough to suggest that private assurances had been discussed outside proper channels. And if that became known? Cresswell gave an ugly little smile. Questions in Parliament, headlines, French embarrassment, British embarrassment, careers ended, possibly more. I said, "Then March stole it." "No," said Cresswell, "not exactly." Poirot's head lifted. "Explain." The Major took a breath. March did not steal the original memorandum from Lévy's dispatch case. He arranged for someone to copy it before it went missing. Poirot stood very still. "Before it went missing?" "Yes." "Then why was it removed afterward?" Because once March realized what else was in it, what Vallon had added verbally that evening, he panicked. A copy was not enough. The paper itself had to vanish so that suspicion could be directed elsewhere. And Lévy? He was convenient. There it was again, that ugly word. Convenient. I felt a real desire to strike the man. Claire Deforges said in a low voice, "You let them destroy him." Cresswell rounded on her. "You think I do not know that? You think I have slept well?" "No," said Poirot. "I think you have slept badly and behaved worse." Cresswell flushed. "I did not know it would go this far." "No man ever does," said Poirot. "That is why wickedness so often begins in compromise." He looked at the clock. It was 20 minutes past 8. "We have 45 minutes. Hastings, we go to Charing Cross. Major Cresswell comes with us." "And I?" said Madame Deforge. Poirot considered, then shook his head. "No. If March sees you, it complicates the game. Remain here. George will return. If Captain Lévy arrives, keep him." She opened her lips as if to object, then thought better of it. "Very well." We were in a taxi within 3 minutes, rolling fast through the winter streets. London at night always seems to me a city of intentions. Men hurrying to dinners, assignations, offices, mistakes. That evening every lighted window appeared charged with secrecy. Poirot sat forward, very alert. "Hastings, attend. We know this much. March intends to meet a courier at Charing Cross at 9:15. Either he is delivering something or receiving it. Since he is said to be running, I suspect both. He will wish to exchange papers and then cross the channel at the first opportunity." "Then why threaten Levy?" "To keep him away because Levy knows him, or because someone fears Levy may be used against him." Cresswell said bitterly, "March fears everyone now." Poirot looked at him. "And you, Major? What do you fear?" The man stared out at the passing lamps. "Myself, chiefly." Poirot made no reply. At the station there was the usual noise and confusion. Porters, travellers, military men, women saying hurried goodbyes, the smell of damp wool and steam. Poirot paused only a moment, taking in the great hall with one rapid sweep of the eye. "He will not choose the platform first," he murmured. "Too exposed. He will choose a place where a man may appear to wait by accident. The bookstall, perhaps, or the left luggage office. Something public enough to seem safe." We moved toward the concourse. I kept a hand near my pocket, though I had no revolver with me, which at the time seemed an omission of some gravity. Cresswell followed, white-faced. Then he gripped my arm. "There," he whispered. A man stood half-turned near a pillar by the bookstall, well-dressed, dark overcoat, hat pulled low, posture easy but watchful. I had never seen Stephen March, yet one knew him at once. He had the air of the kind of man who passes everywhere because he has trained the world not to stop him. A second man approached from the far side, a compact figure with a travelling case. French, I thought at once, though I could not have said why. Poirot's voice came low and quick. "Do nothing yet." March spoke 2 words to the other man. The other answered. Something changed hands. Too fast for me to see clearly. Then, from behind us, and utterly unexpectedly, came another voice. "March!" It was Paul Levy. For one frozen instant, all 4 men turned. How he had got there I did not know then. Later we learned our telegram had reached his rooms only after he had already left, having received a note purportedly from Cresswell begging him to come. But at that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Levy, pale but determined, was striding straight toward the man who had ruined him. March's face altered. It was the face not of a diplomatist, but of a trapped animal. He made one violent movement, not away, but inward toward Levy. Poirot shouted, "Hastings!" I flung myself forward just as March's arm came up. There was a flash of steel under the station lights. I caught his shoulder. We went down together against the bookstall, sending newspapers flying in all directions. He struck hard and fast, like a desperate man. I had one confused impression of Poirot seizing the courier's wrist, of Cresswell grappling with Levy to drag him back, and of a porter yelling for the police. March twisted savagely, trying to free the knife. I hit him as cleanly as I could. His head snapped back against the wooden frame. The knife clattered across the tiles. 2 station policemen arrived at a run. Everything after that occurred with absurd speed. March was hauled upright, cursing now with all the polish stripped off him. The courier had gone ash-grey. Levy stood against the pillar, breathing hard, one hand to his coat, where the blade had very nearly reached him. Poirot, hat askew but moustaches still miraculously correct, stooped and picked up the fallen object that had changed hands in the first instant. It was not a packet of banknotes, nor a passport. It was a folded paper in an official envelope. Poirot looked at the seal, then at March. "Ah," he said softly, "so here, at last, is the other memorandum." March said nothing, but Cresswell, staring at the envelope as though it were his own death warrant, whispered, "My God." Poirot turned to Lévy, who was still white to the lips but standing. "No, my friend," he said. "Not God, only men, which is usually worse." And as the police closed around us and the crowd pressed nearer in that vulgar excitement which London displays whenever violence interrupts routine, I saw that the case had shifted at last. Lévy was no longer merely the accused man defending himself. The paper in Poirot's hand had become a weapon against those who had condemned him. Whether it would be enough to save him, however, was another matter entirely. Some of you have asked if there's another way to support us right now. There is one we'd like to share, and it's something my wife and I created together. Alongside Nocturnal Tales, we wrote a children's book called Sherlock Paws and the Diamond of the Nile, available on Amazon. It's a classic detective story, reimagined for younger readers, with one important twist. Sherlock Holmes is a dog. In this story, Sherlock Paws and his loyal companion Dr. Spot set off on an adventure to Egypt, where a valuable diamond has vanished. With noses twitching and tails wagging, they rely on observation, logic, and attention to detail to uncover the truth. It's a mystery full of friendship, travel, and discovery, adventurous, but always warm and age-appropriate. The goal of the book is simple: to introduce children to detective thinking in a way that feels playful and engaging. Instead of noise and spectacle, the story rewards curiosity. Children are encouraged to notice clues, think things through, and enjoy how small details matter, just as they do in classic mysteries. If you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or young readers in your family, this is a story we genuinely believe they might enjoy. And if you're looking for a way to support our work during this difficult period, purchasing the book helps us directly, while giving something tangible, thoughtful, and fun in return. As always, there's no obligation. We simply wanted to share something we made together with the same care we put into everything else. The link is in the description, and thank you truly for being here. Chapter 5. The paper that no one was meant to read. If there is one thing the English dislike more than scandal, it is scandal made inconveniently precise. A vague disgrace may be borne with admirable fortitude, especially when attached to someone else. But once names, times, signatures, and documents begin to appear, the moral courage of many respectable persons undergoes a remarkable collapse. It was shortly after 11 that we found ourselves in a private room at Scotland Yard. Stephen March sat at one end of the table with a police inspector beside him. His collar was disordered, his smooth composure destroyed, and there was a bruise beginning to darken along his temple, where he had struck the bookstall during our struggle at Charing Cross. Yet even then one felt in him the remains of that dangerous quality which had carried him so far. The conviction that cleverness could always, in the last resort, outlive consequences. Captain Paul Lévy sat opposite, pale and silent, with the look of a man who has not yet quite understood by what turn of Providence he is still alive. Major Cresswell was there also, though he looked as though he would gladly have exchanged places with either prisoner or victim, if only it might spare him what was to come. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece with the recovered envelope in his hand. The inspector in charge, a broad, steady man named Barnes, had already heard enough to know that the matter was not for easy handling. But he had the great virtue, uncommon in official men, of preferring the truth to tidiness. "Well, Monsieur Poirot," he said, "let us have it plainly." Poirot nodded. "Plainly, then. Captain Lévy was suspected because a memorandum disappeared from his keeping. But Captain Lévy was chosen less because evidence pointed to him than because suspicion was useful. Mr. Stephen March had been engaged in unofficial dealings connected with military and diplomatic arrangements. The original memorandum contained references dangerous to those dealings. A copy was first made. Then the original was removed, so that if inquiry followed, Captain Levy might be made to appear responsible. Barnes looked at March. "Is that true?" March smiled faintly. "You have only this gentleman's theory." Poirot lifted the envelope. "And this?" He opened it with elaborate care, drew out the paper within, and spread it upon the table. I had no chance to read every line then, but I saw enough. It was indeed a memorandum, brief, crisp, official in style. Yet on the final page there were several annotations in another hand, one of them initialed, and a separate attached note referring to an assurance conveyed through SM and not to be entered in formal correspondence. Barnes bent over it. "What does SM stand for?" "Stephen March," said Poirot. March laughed. "Or Samuel Morris, or Sidney Brown, or Satan himself." Poirot did not even glance at him. "Attached to the memorandum," he continued, "was the danger, not the summary itself, but the evidence that assurances had been carried privately, outside proper channels, by a man with no lawful authority to commit them." Barnes frowned. "And General Vallon?" "Received those assurances. Colonel Harbury knew something of them, but not all. Major Cresswell knew enough to be afraid." The inspector turned. "Major?" Cresswell swallowed. "Yes." Barnes's voice hardened. "You had better start speaking usefully." For a moment I thought the man would still try to evade. Then something seemed to go out of him. He sat down slowly and passed a hand over his face. "It began," he said, "with vanity, God help us, most bad things do. March liked to be thought indispensable. He cultivated ministers, attachés, journalists, women with salons. He passed messages where no messages should have passed. Most of it was air, suggestions, impressions, hints. Then one day some fool actually relied on him." "Who?" asked Barnes. Cresswell shook his head. "I don't know how far up it goes, that's the truth. I knew only that March was being used as an unofficial intermediary with Vallon's people. It was thought safer, more flexible. Nothing written, nothing binding." Poirot said softly, "Until someone wrote." "Yes." He glanced helplessly at the paper. The memorandum included just enough reference to those conversations to make denial difficult if it ever surfaced. March had it copied by a clerk he had compromised. Money, probably. Then, when Vallon came to dinner and the talk turned ugly, March realized the danger was greater than he had supposed. He removed the original from Levy's office later that evening. Levy looked up sharply. "You are saying he had access to my room?" Cresswell nodded. "Yes, through Harbury's outer office. There was confusion that night. A servant was used. A key borrowed, returned borrowed again. It was done quickly." "And Harbury knew?" "No, not then. Later he suspected enough to fear the truth." Poirot added, "And once the suspicion settled on Captain Levy, Colonel Harbury preferred the smaller injustice to the larger scandal." That was harsh, but true. I remembered Harbury's face and did not doubt it. Barnes tapped the memorandum. "Then why this second paper? Why run tonight?" March answered at last, coolly enough though his voice had lost some strength. "Because the position had altered." Poirot turned to him. "Yes, because someone had begun to talk." March's eyes flickered just once toward Cresswell. The Major dropped his gaze. Poirot continued, "Mr. March had kept, as foolish men always do, a second and more dangerous paper, a safeguard, a lever, an insurance against abandonment. If things went badly, he could prove that he had not acted alone. But such insurance becomes perilous when one is no longer sure whom to blackmail and whom to trust. Therefore, tonight, he attempted to pass it to the French courier and flee." Barnes said, "And kill Levy if necessary." March gave a tiny shrug. "Captain Levy was never meant to involve himself. Levy rose half out of his chair. "You damned scoundrel." Poirot lifted a hand. "No, no, sit down, my friend. He is not worth the loss of your dignity." It was one of the few things that could have made Levy obey. He sat again, trembling with contained anger. Barnes looked to Poirot. "One thing still sticks in my throat. Why Levy in particular? Why not some clerk, some servant, some easier victim?" Before Poirot could answer, March did. "Because Levy fitted." The room went very still. March leaned back, his damaged elegance curdling into something meaner. He was precise, foreign, solitary, and already disliked by the right people. He had ability enough to seem dangerous and not enough backing to protect him. Half the work was done before I began. Men were ready to believe him guilty because they preferred him guilty. Levy's face had gone white again, but this time not with fear. Poirot's voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Yes, that is the ugliest part. Not the theft, not even the lie. The readiness." Barnes straightened. "That will do." He spoke to the constable at the door, giving instructions in a low voice. March did not resist as he was taken out. He had reached the stage at which a clever man begins, at last, to understand that cleverness is not the same as escape. When he had gone, the room seemed to breathe again. Levy sat motionless. Then he said, without looking up, "It will not matter." Barnes stared. "Not matter?" "The truth," said Levy. "Not enough. There will be no trial in open court if they can help it. There will be no public apology. They will bury him, bury the paper, bury the whole thing. And I shall remain the man who was suspected." No one answered at once because it was too plainly possible. Then Poirot moved closer. "My friend," he said, "listen to me. There are two kinds of victory. One is theatrical. It arrives with the trumpets, the front page, the cheers. The other is colder. It is the simple fact that the truth exists and can no longer be wholly denied. You may not receive from the world all that is owed to you. The world is a miser. But those who wronged you will know, and some doors that were shut will open again." Levy gave a faint, exhausted smile. "You offer a modest heaven, Monsieur Poirot." "I am practical," said Poirot. Inspector Barnes cleared his throat. "I cannot promise what the departments will do, but I can promise this. Captain Levy's name will not remain under active suspicion from this night forward." It was not much. It was, perhaps, the most an honest policeman could say. We left the yard near 1 in the morning. The air had turned bitterly cold, and the lamps shone in the damp blackness with that lonely brilliance London sometimes has after midnight. For some distance, neither Poirot nor I spoke. At last I said, "It is a beastly ending." Poirot pulled his scarf a little closer. "Yes." No dramatic confession, no full vindication, no satisfying collapse of all the villains at once. "No." I kicked irritably at the pavement. "It isn't fair." Poirot gave me a sideways look. "My dear Hastings, if you wanted fairness, you should not have chosen to live among human beings." That was very much like him, cruelly exact, and somehow consoling for that reason. As we turned into Whitehaven Mansions, George opened the door before we rang. Behind him, in the light of the hall, stood Claire Desforges. She had evidently been waiting a long time, but when she saw us, she asked only one question. "Is he—" Poirot removed his gloves with infinite care. "Captain Levy lives," he said, "and the truth lives also. For tonight, madame. That must be enough." Her face changed then, not dramatically, but with a relief so deep that all its control could not hide it. And in that moment I thought that though governments might lie, newspapers sneer, and institutions protect themselves like old beasts in a thicket, there still remained in the world certain stubborn loyalties which were not so easily managed. Sometimes they were the only honest things left. Epilogue: the real affair behind this story. This story was inspired by the Dreyfus affair, one of the most infamous miscarriages of justice in modern French history. In 1894, Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army, was accused of passing military secrets to Germany. The case against him rested on extremely weak and questionable evidence, much of it tied to a handwritten document known as the bordereau. Dreyfus was convicted of treason, publicly degraded, and sent to Devil's Island. What made the affair so explosive was not just the conviction itself, but what followed. Evidence later emerged, pointing instead to another officer, Major Ferdinand Walsin Esterhazy. Rather than admit error, powerful figures within the French army tried to protect the institution. Evidence was concealed, distorted, and even forged. One of the key figures in that cover-up was Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Joseph Henry, who fabricated evidence to strengthen the case against Dreyfus. The affair became far bigger than one man's trial. It exposed deep divisions inside France, army against civilian critics, conservatives against Republicans, Catholics against secularists, and above all, widespread anti-Semitism. Many people were willing to believe Dreyfus guilty not because the evidence was strong, but because he was a Jew, an outsider, and a convenient scapegoat. The case exploded again in public when writer Émile Zola published his famous open letter, J'accuse, in 1898, accusing the authorities of knowingly condemning an innocent man. Zola was prosecuted for libel, but his intervention forced the scandal into the open. Dreyfus was brought back for a second trial in 1899 and absurdly was convicted again, though with extenuating circumstances, a disgraceful compromise. He was then pardoned, but a pardon is not the same as innocence. Only in 1906 was Alfred Dreyfus fully exonerated and reinstated in the French army. That is the real heart of the affair, not simply espionage, but institutional cowardice, political self-protection, forged evidence, public hysteria, and the destruction of a man because admitting the truth was too costly for those in power. That is why the Dreyfus affair still matters. It remains the classic example of what happens when a state decides that preserving its own prestige matters more than justice.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, do subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates a proper mystery. It helps more than most people think, and it remains one of the simplest ways to help this show continue. If you'd like more stories, you can find our full back catalogue on Patreon and Spotify, with extra new stories there as well. And if you'd like to support our work more directly, you can do so on Patreon. Tiers start at $2.99 with ad-free listening and extra stories, or for occasional support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. All links are in the description. Thank you for listening. And now, be fair before you are certain, and do not let confidence outrun the facts. Good night.